Christmas Eve, at Greystone Hall, a snowbound English manor, where a ruthless millionaire, Simeon Lee, is found brutally murdered in a locked study, his throat slashed, blood staining the rug. Hercule Poirot, the brilliant detective, steps into a web of family secrets, betrayal, and greed, with a hidden passage, a misplaced bloodstain, and a missing will. Every heir-loyal Alfred, greedy George, vengeful David, roguish Harry, enigmatic Pilar, and secretive Stephen has a motive. As Poirot's little gray cells unravel the truth, a shocking confession reveals love and sacrifice behind the crime. Can you guess the killer before the final twist? Chapter 1. The Invitation. The December wind howled through the streets of London, rattling the windows of Hercule Poirot's impeccably ordered flat in Whitehaven Mansions. The detective sat by a crackling fire, his small, precise hands folded over a cup of tisane, his mustache waxed to symmetrical perfection. The room was a study in fastidiousness. Polished mahogany gleamed. Books stood in military alignment, and not a speck of dust dared settle on the mantel. Yet, Poirot's dark, almond-shaped eyes betrayed a restlessness, a hunger for a problem to engage his formidable intellect. On the table before him lay an envelope, its heavy cream paper embossed with the crest of Greystone Hall, a Devon estate of some repute. The letter within, penned in an uneven but commanding scrawl, had arrived that morning, stirring Poirot's curiosity. It was from Simeon Lee, a millionaire whose name carried whispers of ruthless ambition and a shadowed past in the South African diamond fields. Now, in his twilight years, Lee had retreated to his ancestral pile, a recluse save for rare, imperious summons to the world beyond. Monsieur Poirot, the letter began, I am an old man, but not yet a fool. I sense mischief brewing among those who surround me, and I require a mind such as yours to observe and, if necessary, to act. Come to Greystone Hall for Christmas. You will find a puzzle worthy of your little gray cells. I offer you my hospitality, and, should the need arise, a fee commensurate with your reputation. Yours, Simeon Lee. Poirot's lips curved beneath his mustache. The letter was vague, yet its tone half challenge, half plea intrigued him. Lee's reputation preceded him, a man who had clawed his way from poverty to riches, leaving a trail of broken partnerships and embittered kin. Why now, Poirot wondered, did such a man summon a detective? Was it fear, or was it a game? The prospect of a Christmas spent unraveling human motives was far more enticing than the quiet holiday he had planned. He rose, his movements precise, and consulted his travel case. The train to Devon departed tomorrow morning. With a nod to his valet, who hovered discreetly, Poirot confirmed his plans. The English countryside, mon ami, he murmured. It is charming, yes, but often it conceals the most unquiet hearts. The following day, the train to Devon chugged through, a landscape draped in winter's austerity. Snow dusted the rolling hills, and bare trees stood like sentinels against the gray sky. Poirot, wrapped in a thick overcoat and muffler, sat in a first-class carriage, his eyes scanning a dossier he had compiled on Simeon Lee. The man's life read like a novel of conquest. Born to modest means, he had ventured to South Africa in his youth, amassing a fortune in diamonds, through means not always scrupulous. His marriage to a gentlewoman had produced 4 sons, but scandals shadowed the family whispers of infidelity, a wife driven to despair, and children raised in resentment. Now, widowed and frail, Lee had called his scattered family to Greystone Hall for a Christmas reunion. The timing, Poirot noted, coincided with his own invitation. A coincidence? None, Poirot thought. There are no coincidences in such matters. As the train neared its destination, the conductor announced a delay due to snow on the tracks. Poirot, unperturbed, gazed out at the whitening world. His mind turned to the family he would meet. Alfred, the eldest son, was said to be loyal, but uninspired, tethered to his father's estate. George, a member of Parliament, carried a reputation for pomposity and greed. David, the third son, was an artist, sensitive and estranged, harboring old wounds. Harry, the youngest, had been the prodigal, vanishing abroad after quarrels with his father. And then there was Pilar Estravados, a granddaughter from a long-dead daughter, newly arrived from Spain. A final name, Stephen Farr, a cousin from South Africa, piqued Poirot's interest. What role did this outsider play in Lee's plans? The train lurched forward, and soon Gorston Hall came into view, its Gothic turrets piercing the snowy mist. The station, a small affair, was nearly deserted, save for a chauffeured car bearing the Lee crest. The driver, a taciturn man with wind-reddened cheeks, tipped his cap and ushered Poirot into the vehicle. The drive to the hall wound through frostbitten lanes, the car's wheels crunching on fresh snow. Poirot's thoughts churned. Simeon Lee's letter had spoken of mischief, but the word felt too mild. Danger, perhaps, or something darker still. The car swept through iron gates, and Gorston Hall loomed before him, its stone facade, austere yet grand, its windows glowing with the promise of warmth. As Poirot stepped from the car, a butler emerged, his demeanor as stiff as his starched collar. "Monsieur Poirot, welcome to Gorston Hall. Mr. Lee awaits you." Chapter 2. The family gathers. The grand hall of Gorston Hall enveloped Hercule Poirot in a cocoon of old-world opulence as he crossed its threshold. The air was heavy with the scent of polished oak and beeswax, and a vast chandelier glittered above, casting prisms of light across the marble floor. A colossal fireplace roared, its flames licking at logs the size of small trees. Yet the warmth did little to dispel the chill of tension that hung like a mist. The butler, Horbury, a man with a face as expressionless as a waxwork, took Poirot's coat and muffler with practiced deference, his eyes avoiding direct contact. "Mr. Lee will receive you shortly, sir," he murmured, gesturing toward a drawing-room where the murmur of voices already stirred. Poirot, his small, precise figure, dwarfed by the hall's grandeur, adjusted his cuffs and surveyed his surroundings. The walls were adorned with portraits of stern-faced Lees, their eyes following him with the weight of ancestral judgment. A massive staircase spiraled upward, its banisters carved with mythical beasts that seemed to snarl in the flickering light. The house, Poirot noted, was a stage, and Simeon Lee, its master, was no doubt its director. But what drama was to unfold? The cryptic invitation had promised mischief, and Poirot's little gray cells were already alert, cataloging every detail. Horbury led him to the drawing-room, where the family had gathered for tea. The room was a study in contrasts. Delicate porcelain cups sat on a mahogany table, while the heavy velvet curtains seemed to absorb the weak December light filtering through tall windows. Snow piled against the panes, sealing the house in a cocoon of isolation. As Poirot entered, conversation faltered, and a dozen pairs of eyes turned toward him, each pair carrying its own blend of curiosity, suspicion, or indifference. At the head of the room, ensconced in a high-backed chair like a throne, sat Simeon Lee. His frail frame was swathed in a velvet smoking jacket, but his eyes sharp, predatory, and glinting with malice belied his physical weakness. His white hair was sparse, his hands gnarled, yet there was an undeniable vitality in his presence, as if he drew energy from the discomfort of those around him. "Monsieur Poirot," he rasped, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "So, you've come to my little circus. Welcome." His lips curled into a grin that was more challenge than warmth. Poirot inclined his head, his mustache twitching slightly. "Monsieur Lee, your invitation was most intriguing. I am here to observe, as you requested, and perhaps to assist." Simeon chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "Oh, you'll have plenty to observe, I wager. My family, they're a pack of vultures, circling for my fortune. Aren't you, my dears?" His gaze swept the room, and Poirot followed it, noting the reactions of those assembled. Nearest Simeon stood Alfred Lee, the eldest son, a man in his late 40s, with a pinched face and stooped shoulders, as if bowed by years of deference. His suit was impeccable, but unremarkable, and his hands fidgeted with a teaspoon, betraying unease. Beside him, his wife, Lydia, a thin woman with sharp features and intelligent eyes, poured tea with a grace that seemed practiced to the point of instinct. Her smile was polite but strained, and Poirot sensed she was the linchpin holding her husband's fragile composure together. Across the room, George Lee, the second son, held court near the fireplace, a portly man with a florid complexion. He wore his status as a member of Parliament like a badge, his voice booming as he lectured a young footman on politics. His wife, Magdalene, lounged on a settee, her auburn hair piled high and her silk dress clinging to a figure that suggested more youth than her years warranted. She sipped her tea with an air of boredom, her green eyes darting toward the door as if longing for escape. David Lee, the third son, sat apart, his sketchbook open on his lap. His face was pale, almost boyish, with dark eyes that burned with an intensity Poirot found unsettling. His wife, Hilda, a sturdy woman with a calm demeanor, sat beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm, as if to anchor him. David's pencil moved restlessly, sketching something Poirot could not see, but the set of his jaw suggested old wounds still festered. Harry Lee, the youngest son, leaned against a bookcase, a cigarette dangling from his lips. His handsome face, weathered by years abroad, carried a roguish charm, but his eyes were wary, as if he expected a trap at any moment. He had returned to Greystone Hall after a long absence, and his presence seemed to unsettle his brothers, particularly Alfred, who glanced at him with ill-concealed resentment. Near the window stood Pilar Estravados, Simeon's granddaughter, a striking young woman with olive skin and lustrous black hair. Her Spanish heritage was evident in her fluid movements and the flash of her dark eyes, which seemed to take in everything with a mix of amusement and calculation. She wore a crimson dress that stood out like a flame against the room's muted tones, and her laughter, when it came, was bright but fleeting. Finally, there was Stephen Farr, introduced as a distant cousin from South Africa. Tall and lean, with sun-browned skin and a quiet intensity, he stood apart, his hands in his pockets, observing the family with an outsider's detachment. His gray eyes met Poirot's briefly, and there was a flicker of something recognition, perhaps, or caution that piqued the detective's interest. Simeon clapped his hands, drawing attention. "Well, now that our guest of honor has arrived, let's have some fun, shall we?" His tone was mocking, and Poirot sensed he was orchestrating a scene. "Monsieur Poirot, you've heard of my brood, no doubt. Alfred, my loyal shadow, who'd rather polish my boots than think for himself. George, who thinks Parliament's his personal piggy bank. David, mooning over his paints and his grudges. And Harry, my wayward boy, back to beg for scraps. Then there's Pilar, my Spanish rose, and Stephen, who claims he's just passing through. What do you make of them, eh?" The room bristled with tension. Alfred's face reddened, George sputtered, David's pencil snapped in his hand, and Harry's smile tightened. Pilar laughed softly, but Stephen's expression remained unreadable. Lydia, ever the peacemaker, intervened. "Father, please. Monsieur Poirot is our guest. Shall we have tea?" Her voice was calm, but her eyes flicked. To Simeon with a warning, Poirot accepted a cup, his movements deliberate. "Monsieur Lee, you have a most interesting family. I look forward to knowing them better." His tone was neutral, but his eyes missed nothing. The way George's hand clenched his saucer, the slight tremble in Hilda's fingers as she passed a plate, the way Stephen's gaze lingered on Simeon. Tea progressed with strained civility. Lydia spoke of the Christmas preparations, a grand dinner, a tree from the estate's woods, carols in the village. George complained about the cost of coal, earning a sharp look from Magdalene. David remained silent, his sketchbook now closed, while Hilda murmured about the snow. Harry regaled Pilar with tales of his travels, his voice loud enough to draw Simeon's smirk. Stephen, meanwhile, excused himself to fetch a book, his absence noted by Poirot. As the afternoon waned, Simeon summoned Poirot to his side. "Walk with me, Poirot," he said, gesturing to his wheelchair. "These legs don't work, but my mind's sharp as ever." Horbury pushed the chair toward a corridor, and Poirot followed, noting the family's glances, some relieved, some anxious. In a quiet alcove, Simeon leaned forward, his voice low. "You're no fool, Poirot. I brought you here because I smelled trouble. My family there, all after my money, but there's more to it. Secrets, old and new. I've stirred the pot, inviting them all, and I want you to watch what boils over." His eyes gleamed with a mix of fear and excitement. "I've made enemies, and I'm not long for this world. Find out who's plotting what." Poirot tilted his head. "You suspect a specific danger, monsieur?" Simeon's laugh was bitter. "I suspect everyone. Alfred's loyalty is a chain. George would sell his soul for a shilling. David hates me for what I did to his mother. Harry's a snake, charming but venomous. Pilar's cleverer than she looks. And Stephen, well, he's got his own reasons. Keep your eyes open, Poirot." The detective nodded, his mind racing. Simeon's words were a challenge, but also a confession. The old man was playing a dangerous game, taunting his family, perhaps to provoke a reaction. But why? To expose a traitor, or to amuse himself in his final days? As they returned to the drawing room, the family was dispersing. Alfred and Lydia discussed menus with the housekeeper. George and Magdalen argued in hushed tones. David and Hilda retreated to the library, and Harry offered Pilar a tour of the grounds, which she declined with a smile. Stephen had returned, a book in hand, but his eyes followed Simeon with an intensity that Poirot noted. Dinner that evening was a formal affair. The dining room aglow with candlelight. The table groaned under silver and crystal, but the atmosphere was leaden. Simeon presided, his wheelchair at the head, his voice cutting through the clink of cutlery. "To family," he toasted, his tone mocking. "May we all get what we deserve." The words hung in the air, met with forced smiles and averted eyes. Poirot observed the dynamics. Alfred, seated near his father, nodded dutifully at every barb. George, red-faced, boasted of his political influence, while Magdalen toyed with her wine-glass, her boredom palpable. David ate little, his gaze fixed on a portrait of a woman, his mother. Poirot guessed whose sad eyes mirrored his own. Hilda whispered to him, her voice soothing. Harry, at the far end, regaled the table with tales of Monte Carlo, but his laughter rang hollow. Pilar, seated beside Simeon, parried his teasing with wit, earning his approving nod. Stephen, quiet, ate methodically, his eyes darting between Simeon and the others. As the meal ended, Simeon raised his glass again. "Tomorrow's Christmas Eve, my dears. I've a surprise for you all. A little change to my affairs, perhaps. Sleep well." His grin was predatory, and the room fell silent. Alfred's fork clattered, George choked on his wine, David's hands clenched, and Harry's smile froze. Pilar's eyes narrowed, and Stephen's face was a mask. Poirot, sipping his coffee, felt the weight of unspoken secrets. The family was a powder keg, and Simeon had lit the fuse. As the party dispersed, he lingered, noting the glances exchanged, Alfred's anxious look to Lydia, George's whispered argument with Magdalen, David's retreat with Hilda, Harry's lingering gaze at Pilar, and Stephen's solitary exit to the terrace, where snow fell in silent sheets. The detective retired to his room, a richly appointed chamber with a four-poster bed and a view of the snowbound estate. As he adjusted his tie in the mirror, he murmured, "Mon vieux, this is no ordinary Christmas. The stage is set, the players assembled. But who will strike the first blow?" His little gray cells hummed, already piecing together the puzzle of Greystone Hall. Chapter 3. The Patriarch's Game. The morning of December 23rd dawned over Greystone Hall with a sky the color of tarnished silver, the snow piling higher against the estate's ancient walls. Hercule Poirot, ever meticulous, had risen early, his morning ritual of café au lait and a single, perfectly buttered croissant completed in the solitude of his guest room. The room, with its heavy damask curtains and polished walnut furniture, seemed to whisper of secrets held within the house's stone heart. Poirot adjusted his tie, his reflection in the mirror a study in precision, and prepared to meet the day. Simeon Lee's cryptic summons weighed on his mind, and the old man's taunting words at dinner, promising a surprise for his family, suggested a man who delighted in control, even from his wheelchair. What game, Poirot wondered, was the patriarch playing? He descended the grand staircase, his polished shoes silent on the thick runner, and found the household stirring. The scent of cedar and pine wafted from the drawing room, where servants were erecting a towering Christmas tree under Lydia Lee's watchful eye. Her instructions were crisp, her movements economical, yet Poirot noted a tightness about her mouth, as if she braced for an unseen blow. The rest of the family was scattered, Alfred in the library, poring over estate ledgers, George in the morning room, dictating letters to a harried secretary, David and Hilda walking the snow-dusted gardens, their heads bent in quiet conversation. Harry, predictably, was absent, likely sleeping off last night's brandy. Pilar Estravados, vibrant in a green wool dress, flitted about the hall, her laughter echoing as she helped a maid with garlands. Stephen Farr, the enigmatic cousin, was nowhere to be seen. Poirot's first task was to meet Simeon Lee, who had requested a private audience in his study. The butler, Horbury, led him through a maze of corridors, each lined with portraits and heavy tapestries that seemed to absorb the light. The study was a fortress within the house, a cavernous room with dark paneling, a massive desk cluttered with papers, and a fireplace where logs smoldered. Simeon sat by the hearth, his wheelchair positioned to command the space, a tartan blanket draped over his thin legs. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, fixed on Poirot with an intensity that belied his frailty. "Monsieur Poirot," Simeon began, his voice a low rasp, "you slept well, I trust. No ghosts haunting Greystone Hall yet?" His smile was sly, almost predatory. Poirot inclined his head, seating himself in a leather chair opposite. "The house is most comfortable, Monsieur Lee, but I suspect it is not ghosts you fear. Nan, your letters spoke of mischief. Perhaps you might share more." Simeon leaned back, his fingers drumming on the armrest. "You're a sharp one, aren't you? I like that. Yes, there's mischief, a foutor, worse. My family, Poirot, they're a nest of vipers, every one of them. I've brought them here to see what they're made of, to test their mettle. And you're here to watch the show." Poirot's mustache twitched. "A test, monsieur, or a provocation? Your words last night, about changing your affairs, they stirred unease." Simeon's laugh was a dry cackle. "Good. Let them squirm. They think they know me, but they don't. I've made my fortune by outwitting men smarter than them, and I'm not done yet. I've plans, Poirot, plans they won't like, and I want you to see who breaks first." Poirot studied the old man, noting the gleam in his eyes, a mix of cunning and something darker, perhaps fear. "You suspect one of them of plotting against you?" he asked, his tone measured. Simeon's gaze flickered to the fire. "I suspect all of them. Alfred's loyal, but he's weak, might snap under pressure. George is a greedy fool. He'd sell his own children for a profit. David carries a grudge, blames me for his mother's misery. Harry's a rogue, always was. Pilar's a wild card sharp, like her mother was. And Stephen," he paused, his expression hardening. "Stephen's got his own game, I'll wager. He's not what he seems." Poirot leaned forward slightly. And what of you, Monsieur Lee? What game do you play? To provoke your family, to dangle your fortune before them, it is a dangerous sport, Nan. Simeon's grin returned, sharp as a blade. Dangerous, maybe, but I'm old, Poirot. If I'm to go, I'll go with a bang, not a whimper. Keep your eyes open. You'll see things they don't want you to see. The interview ended abruptly when Horbury entered, announcing a visitor from the village, a solicitor, Mr. Charlton, regarding estate matters. Poirot took his leave, his mind buzzing. Simeon was orchestrating a drama, but to what end? To expose a traitor, to settle old scores, or simply to amuse himself? The detective's instincts told him the old man knew more than he revealed, and the mention of Stephen Farr lingered like a shadow. Outside the study, Poirot paused in the corridor, where a tall window overlooked the snowbound estate. The grounds were a white expanse, broken only by the tracks of David and Hilda's morning walk. As he watched, a figure emerged from a side door. Stephen Farr, his coat dusted with snow, his face set in a frown. He glanced up, catching Poirot's eye, and for a moment, their gazes locked. Then Stephen turned away, disappearing into the gardens. Poirot filed the moment away, sensing significance in the man's solitude. The day unfolded with the quiet bustle of a house preparing for Christmas. Lydia oversaw the kitchen, where a cook labored over plum puddings and mince pies. Poirot, ever curious, wandered the public rooms, ostensibly admiring the decor, but in truth observing the household. In the library, he found Alfred, his face pale as he sorted through ledgers. "Father's accounts are a mess," Alfred muttered, unaware of Poirot's presence. "He's been moving money, but to where?" Poirot retreated silently, noting the strain in Alfred's voice. In the morning room, George was dictating a pompous letter to his constituents, his voice drowning out Magdalene's sighs as she flipped through a fashion magazine. "Really, George?" she snapped at last. "Must you drone on? It's Christmas, not a campaign." George's retort was sharp, and Poirot slipped away, intrigued by the discord between them, David and Hilda. Returning from their walk, were in the conservatory, a glass-walled haven filled with hothouse plants. David was sketching a fern, his strokes fierce, while Hilda read aloud from a book of poetry. Poirot, pausing at the door, caught David's murmured words. "He can't keep doing this. Hilda, it's like he wants to break us all." Hilda's reply was soft, soothing, but Poirot sensed her own unease. Pilar, meanwhile, was everywhere helping with decorations, charming the maids, her energy a bright counterpoint to the family's tension. Yet Poirot noted her watchfulness, the way her eyes lingered on each family member, as if measuring them. When she caught him observing her, she flashed a smile. "Monsieur Poirot, you are like a cat, always watching. Do you think we are all so interesting?" Her tone was playful, but her eyes were sharp. "Everyone is interesting, mademoiselle," Poirot replied smoothly, "when one seeks the truth." Harry appeared at luncheon, his hair tousled but his charm undone. He regaled the table with tales of his travels. Casablanca, EU, Cape Town. Each story punctuated by a wink at Pilar, who laughed but kept her distance. Alfred frowned at his brother's levity, while George muttered about waste roast. David ate in silence, his eyes fixed on his plate. Stephen, seated at the table's end, said little, but Poirot noted his hands clenched, then relaxed, as if wrestling with a thought. As the meal ended, Simeon, wheeled in by Horbury, made a brief appearance. "Enjoying yourselves, are you?" he said, his tone biting. "Good. Tomorrow's Christmas Eve, and I've a little gift for you all. Something to make you think." He waved a dismissive hand and was wheeled away, leaving a ripple of unease. Poirot caught Lydia's glance at Alfred, a silent plea, and George's muttered curse. David pushed his chair back abruptly, Hilda following him out. Harry lit a cigarette, his smile tight, while Pilar's expression was unreadable. Stephen excused himself, citing a headache, and Poirot watched him go. Noting the stiffness in his stride, the afternoon brought a flurry of activity as the household prepared for the next day's festivities. Poirot, declining an invitation to join a card game, took a turn about the house, his eyes sharp for details. In a quiet hallway, he overheard a snatch of conversation between Horbury and a maid. "Tressilian, the old man's up to something," Horbury whispered. "Those letters from South Africa, he burned one, but I saw the name, Farr." Tressilian shushed him, and Poirot moved on, his mind turning over the clue. Stephen Farr, again, what tied him to Simeon's past? By evening, the house was aglow with candles and the scent of pine. The family gathered in the drawing room, where a pianist played carols, but the mood was strained. Simeon did not appear, sending word he was resting. Poirot, sipping a glass of sherry, watched the family, Alfred's nervous glances at the door, George's pompous anecdotes, Magdalene's restless fingers, David's brooding silence, Hilda's watchful calm, Harry's forced joviality, Pilar's enigmatic smile, and Stephen's absence, which seemed louder than his presence. As the clock struck 9, Poirot retired, his mind a whirl of impressions. Simeon Lee was stirring a cauldron of resentment, and the family was poised on the edge of conflict. The mention of South Africa, of Stephen, of secrets burned and buried, these were threads in a tapestry Poirot was determined to unravel. In his room, he sat by the window, watching the snow fall, and murmured, "The game, it is afoot, but who will make the first move?" Chapter 4. The scream. Christmas Eve at Greystone Hall unfolded under a pall of unrelenting snow, the drifts piling high against the estate's ancient walls, sealing the household in a cocoon of isolation. Hercule Poirot, ever precise in his habits, had spent the morning in quiet observation, his small, neat figure moving through the grand rooms with the stealth of a cat. The air was thick with the scent of roasting chestnuts and evergreen, and the servants bustled with final preparations for the evening's festivities. Yet beneath the veneer of holiday cheer, a current of unease ran through the house, stirred by Simeon Lee's cryptic promise of a surprise that had left his family on edge. Poirot had breakfasted alone in the morning room, his café au lait and brioche consumed with methodical care as he reviewed the previous day's impressions, Simeon's taunts, the family's strained reactions, and the whispered hint of Stephen Farr's connection to South Africa formed a puzzle that tantalized his little gray cells. The patriarch's game, he sensed, was reaching a crescendo, and the day promised revelations, perhaps dangerous ones. The household was a hive of activity. Lydia Lee, her sharp features softened by the glow of candlelight she was arranging, directed the placement of holly wreaths and silver candelabras in the dining room. Her efficiency was admirable, but Poirot noted the faint tremor in her hands, as if she anticipated a storm. Alfred, ever the dutiful son, hovered nearby, offering suggestions that Lydia gently rebuffed. George Lee, ensconced in the library with a stack of newspapers, grumbled about the government's inaction on some minor policy, his voice carrying through the open door. Magdalene, his wife, drifted through the drawing room in a silk gown, her beauty marred by a petulant frown as she rearranged cushions with unnecessary force. David and Hilda Lee, preferring solitude, had retreated to the conservatory, where David's sketching pencil scratched faintly against paper. Harry Lee, predictably late, sauntered into the hall at noon, his hair tousled and his grin unrepentant. Pilar Estravados, vibrant in a scarlet shawl, flitted between rooms, her laughter a bright note that seemed to jar the others. Stephen Farr, as was his habit, kept to himself, spotted only briefly in the garden, his coat a dark silhouette against the snow. Poirot, choosing to explore the house further, wandered its labyrinthian corridors, his eyes sharp for any clue to Simeon's intentions. In a quiet alcove, he overheard two maids whispering about the old man's temper, how he'd snapped at Horbury that morning over a misplaced letter. From overseas, it was, one maid said, her voice low. He tore it up, but I saw the postmark Cape Town. Poirot filed the detail away, his suspicion of Stephen deepening. A letter from South Africa. Burned like the one Horbury had mentioned, another thread in the tapestry. At luncheon, the family gathered in the dining room, the table set with crystal and linen that gleamed under the chandelier. Simeon, wheeled in by Horbury, was in high spirits, his eyes glinting with a mischief that set Poirot's nerves on edge. "A fine spread, Lydia," he said, his voice carrying a mocking edge. "You've outdone yourself. But then, you always do, don't you? Keeping us all in line." Lydia's smile was tight, and Alfred's fork paused mid-air. The others ate in silence, the clink of cutlery loud in the tense air. Simeon's gaze swept the table, lingering on each face. Alfred's anxious deference, George's flushed indignation, David's brooding intensity, Harry's forced nonchalance, Pilar's enigmatic calm, and Stephen's guarded reserve. As the meal ended, Simeon raised a glass of claret. "To Christmas Eve," he said, his tone laced with irony. "A night for family, for truth. I've something to share tonight, after dinner, a little matter of my estate. You'll all want to hear it." His grin was wolfish, and the room seemed to hold its breath. George coughed, Magdalene's glass trembled, David's eyes narrowed, and Harry's laugh was too loud. Pilar tilted her head, her expression unreadable, while Stephen's fingers tightened around his napkin. Poirot, sipping his water, watched them all, his mind cataloging their reactions. The afternoon passed in a flurry of preparations. The Christmas tree, now adorned with baubles and tinsel, stood in the drawing room, its candles unlit but ready for the evening's ceremony. Carols drifted from a gramophone, their cheer at odds with the household's mood. Poirot, declining a game of bridge proposed by George, took a turn through the grounds, his overcoat buttoned against the biting wind. The snow was deep, the paths nearly obliterated, but he noted a single set of footprints leading from the house to a copse of trees. Following them, he found Stephen Farr, standing alone, his breath clouding in the cold as he stared at the horizon. "Monsieur Farr," Poirot said, approaching, "you find solace in the snow." Stephen turned, his gray eyes wary. "Just needed air, Monsieur Poirot. This house sits stifling." His voice was clipped, and he moved away before Poirot could press further. The detective watched him go, noting the tension in his shoulders. Stifling, indeed, Poirot thought. But why? Dinner that evening was a grand affair. The dining room ablaze with candles, and the table laden with roast goose, glazed ham, and a towering trifle. The family, dressed in formal attire, presented a facade of unity, but the cracks were evident. Alfred, in a stiff suit, sat close to Lydia, whose emerald gown did little to mask her unease. George, resplendent in a dinner jacket, pontificated about the economy, while Magdalene, in sapphire silk, toyed with her pearls, her eyes distant. David, pale and taut, barely touched his food, his gaze fixed on the portrait of his mother above. The mantel, Hilda, in quiet gray, murmured encouragement to him. Harry, dashing in black tie, flirted shamelessly with Pilar, who wore a gown of deep crimson that drew every eye. Stephen, in a plain but well-cut suit, ate with mechanical precision, his silence a contrast to the others' forced chatter. Simeon, at the head, presided with a glee that bordered on malevolent, his wheelchair a throne from which he surveyed his court. As dessert was served, Simeon raised his glass again. "A toast," he said, his voice cutting through the room. "Two secrets revealed, and debts repaid." The words landed like stones, and Poirot saw Alfred flinch, George scowl, David's hand clench, Harry's smile falter, Pilar's eyes sharpen, and Stephen's face harden. The meal ended in silence, the family dispersing to the drawing room for coffee and carols. Simeon, claiming fatigue, retired to his study. Horbury wheeling him away with a deference that seemed to mask distaste. Poirot lingered in the dining room, examining the portrait of David's mother, a woman with sad, expressive eyes, her face framed by dark curls. A plaque read Adeline Lee, 1875 to 1910. The dates stirred Poirot's memory. Simeon's wife, dead young, her life marred by his betrayals. David's pain, he realized, was rooted in her suffering. A clue, perhaps, to the family's fractures. The drawing room was aglow with the Christmas tree's candles, their flames casting dancing shadows. A pianist played Silent Night, but the mood was anything but peaceful. George argued with Magdalene over a holiday in Nice. Alfred and Lydia conferred in whispers. David stared into the fire, Hilda at his side. Harry, pouring brandy, tried to coax Pilar into a dance, but she demurred, her smile polite but distant. Stephen stood by a window, his back to the room, the snow beyond reflecting his isolation. At precisely 10 o'clock, a scream tore through the house, a raw, guttural cry that silenced the carols and froze every heart. It came from upstairs, followed by a crash, like furniture toppling. Poirot was on his feet in an instant, his small frame moving with surprising speed as he followed the family's rush to the source, Simeon's study. The door, heavy oak with an iron bolt, was locked from within. Alfred pounded on it, calling his father's name, but there was no answer. Harry, with a strength born of urgency, joined him, and together they forced the door, the bolt splintering under their weight. The scene within was one of horror. Simeon Lee lay sprawled on the rug, his throat slashed, blood pooling beneath him, in a dark, glistening stain. The room was in disarray, a table overturned, papers scattered, a chair on its side. The fire burned low, casting eerie shadows. The window was shut, its latch secure, and the key to the door lay in Simeon's pocket, glinting in the lamplight. No one could have entered or left, yet the old man was dead, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. The family stood frozen, their faces a gallery of shock and fear. Lydia gasped, clutching Alfred's arm. George's mouth worked soundlessly, Magdalene's hand at her throat. David's face was ashen, Hilda's arm around him. Harry swore under his breath, his bravado gone. Pilar's eyes were wide but dry, her composure unsettling. Stephen, last to enter, stared at the body, his expression unreadable. Poirot knelt beside the corpse, his gloved hands careful not to disturb the scene. The wound was precise, a single deep cut, the work of a sharp blade. His eyes scanned the room, landing on a bloodstain on the hearth, oddly distant from the body, too far, he thought, for a natural spill. The rug beneath Simeon was askew, its edge curled, and Poirot's mind seized on the anomaly. Something was amiss, staged, perhaps, but how? Horbury, trembling, was sent to telephone the police. Within the hour, Inspector Sugden, a tall, earnest man with a weathered face, arrived, his boots leaving wet tracks on the marble floor. The snow had delayed him, but his manner was brisk as he surveyed the scene. "Locked room, eh?" he said, scratching his chin. "No one in or out, and yet, here we are. Monsieur Poirot, any thoughts?" Poirot rose, his eyes gleaming. "A puzzle, Inspector, but one with a solution. The bloodstain is not where it should be. In the room, it tells a story, if we listen." Sugden began questioning the family, each claiming to have been elsewhere at the time of the scream. Alfred and Lydia were in the drawing room, discussing menus. George was in the billiard room, practicing shots. David and Hilda were in the library, reading. Harry and Pilar were in the conservatory, chatting. Stephen, alone, had been walking in the garden, though the snow showed no fresh tracks of detail. Poirot noted with interest. Horbury admitted hearing Simeon argue with someone earlier, but the voice was muffled, the words unclear. As the family dispersed, shaken and subdued, Poirot lingered in the study, his gaze returning to the bloodstain. It was too precise, too isolated. The locked door, the secure window, the overturned table all suggested a struggle, yet something felt contrived. The little gray cells, he murmured, they will find the truth. The night was young, and the game, he knew, had taken a deadly turn. Chapter 5. Motives abound. The air in Greystone Hall was thick with dread, as the clock struck midnight, the chimes echoing through the silent corridors like a funeral knell. The snow continued to fall outside, cloaking the estate in an unbroken shroud of white, as if nature itself conspired to trap the inhabitants with their secrets. Hercule Poirot stood in the study where Simeon Lee's body still lay, covered now with a sheet, awaiting the coroner's arrival, delayed by the storm. Inspector Sugden, his notebook open, paced the room, his boots scuffing the polished floor. The locked door, the secure window, the misplaced bloodstain on the hearth all formed a puzzle that tantalized Poirot's meticulous mind. The family, dismissed to their rooms, had left behind a residue of fear and suspicion, and Poirot knew the time had come to probe deeper into the motives that swirled around Simeon's death. Sugden, rubbing his temples, turned to Poirot. A devil of a case, Monsieur Poirot. Locked room, no weapon, no footprints in the snow. It's like a ghost did it. Where do we start? Poirot's eyes gleamed, his mustache twitching slightly. We start, Inspector, with the human heart. The room may be locked, but motives are not. Each person here had reason to wish Monsieur Lee dead. We must uncover those reasons, and the truth will follow. Sugden nodded, his expression weary, but determined. Right. I'll take statements from everyone. You'll sit in, I presume? Maze, Poirot replied, adjusting his cuffs. The little gray cells, they listen, they observe. Let us begin. The interviews took place in the library, a somber room lined with leather-bound volumes and lit by a single lamp that cast long shadows. The family, summoned one by one, entered with varying degrees of reluctance, their faces betraying the strain of the night's horror. Poirot sat in a high-backed chair, his hands folded, his gaze sharp as a scalpel, while Sugden stood by the desk, pencil poised. First came Alfred Lee, his face pale and drawn, his hands twisting a handkerchief. I can't believe it, he stammered. Father murdered. It's unthinkable. He admitted to being in the drawing room with Lydia when the scream rang out, discussing the Christmas menu. Father was always hard on me, he said, his voice low. Called me spineless, said I'd never amount to anything without his name. Last night, he hinted he'd cut me from the will, said I didn't deserve it. His eyes flicked to Poirot, then away. But I'd never harm him. He was my father. Poirot tilted his head. You were loyal, monsieur, yet loyalty can breed resentment. Nan, did you argue with him yesterday? Alfred flushed. No argument. I tried to please him, always. But he mocked me, even in front of you all. His voice cracked, and Sugden dismissed him, noting his alibi but sensing his fragility. Lydia followed, her composure a stark contrast to her husband's. Her gray eyes were steady, but Poirot noted the tightness of her lips. Alfred and I were together, she confirmed. We heard the scream and ran upstairs. I saw nothing unusual before that. She hesitated when asked about Simeon's taunts. He was cruel, yes. He enjoyed making Alfred feel small. Last week, he told me he might leave the estate to someone else, someone with fire, he said. It hurt Alfred terribly. Her voice was calm, but her fingers clenched her shawl, betraying her tension. Poirot wondered if her loyalty to Alfred masked a deeper anger. George Lee entered next, his florid face puffed with indignation. This is outrageous, he blustered, adjusting his tie. A man of my position, questioned like a common criminal. He claimed to have been in the billiard room, practicing shots alone, when the scream came. Father was a tyrant, he admitted, his voice dropping. Always throwing his money in my face, calling me a leech. Last night, he said he'd cut my share, give it to some charity, or worse, to Harry. Harry, of all people. His fists clenched. But I didn't kill him. I'm a respectable man. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Respectable men, Monsieur Lee, can act in desperation. Your father's threat, angered you. George sputtered. Angered, yes, but murder, never. Sugden scribbled, unconvinced, and sent him out. Magdalene Lee swept in, her silk dress rustling, her perfume heavy in the air. She perched on a chair, her green eyes darting between Poirot and Sugden. I was with George in the drawing room earlier, but he went to the billiard room before the scream. I stayed, chatting with a maid. Her voice was light, but her fingers toyed nervously with her pearls. Simeon didn't like me, she said. Called me a gold digger, said I'd bleed George dry. He threatened to cut George's inheritance, unless I left, as if I'd go back to nothing. Her laugh was brittle. Poirot noted her fear not of Simeon, but of poverty. David Lee was next, his face a mask of anguish. Hilda stood by him, her hand on his shoulder, but he shook her off as he sat. I was in the library with Hilda, reading, he said, his voice hoarse. Father, he ruined my mother. She died broken because of him. He taunted me about it, always. Yesterday, he said he'd leave her portrait to a museum, as if she meant nothing. His hands trembled, and his eyes burned with a quiet fury. I hated him, yes, but I didn't kill him. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. Hilda, questioned. Separately, confirmed their alibi. David's sensitive, she said softly. Simeon's cruelty cut him deeply, but he's no murderer. We were together, as he said. Her calm was unshakable, but Poirot sensed she was shielding David, perhaps from himself. Harry Lee sauntered in, his charm undimmed, despite the hour. In the conservatory, with Pilar, he said, lighting a cigarette. Pretty girl, that one. Father didn't approve, of course. Called me a wastrel, said he'd leave me nothing unless I shaped up. As if I cared for his money. His grin was defiant, but Poirot caught a flicker of unease in his eyes. You didn't care, monsieur, Poirot asked. Yet you returned to Greystone Hall. Why? Harry shrugged. Curiosity? Thought the old man might soften. Guess I was wrong. His nonchalance felt forced, and Sugden noted it. Pilar Estravados entered like a flame, her crimson dress vivid against the library's gloom. I was with Harry, she said, her Spanish accent lilting. We talked of silly things, flowers, music. Then the scream came. Her dark eyes met Poirot's, unflinching. My grandfather was kind to me, welcomed me when I arrived, but he said things about family secrets, about surprises in his will. He liked to stir trouble. Her smile was enigmatic, and Poirot wondered what she knew. Stephen Farr was last, his lean frame tense as he sat. I was in the garden, walking, he said, his voice low. I heard the scream from outside, and came in. Poirot raised an eyebrow. In the snow, monsieur, yet there were no fresh tracks. Stephen's jaw tightened. It was snowing, hard. They must have been covered. His alibi was weak, and his eyes avoided Poirot's. Simeon and we weren't close, he said. He invited me, but I don't know why. Said something about old debts, but I didn't care for his games. Sugden dismissed him, then turned to Poirot. Everyone's got a motive, and no one's alibi is ironclad. What's your take? Poirot rose, pacing slowly. The motives, they are many: greed, resentment, revenge. But the bloodstain troubles me. It is too far from the body, too deliberate. And the room locked from within suggests a plan, not a passion. We must look closer, Sugden agreed, and they returned to the study. Poirot examined the bloodstain again, kneeling to inspect the rug. It was slightly askew, and he detected a faint residue wax, perhaps as if the rug had been moved to misplace the stain. The table, overturned, had scratches on its legs, suggesting it was deliberately toppled. The window's latch was secure, the door's bolt intact. Yet the key in Simeon's pocket nagged at him. Too convenient to staged Horbury. Summoned, was nervous, his eyes darting. I heard nothing unusual, he insisted, but admitted Simeon had been agitated, muttering about family lies, before retiring. Poirot pressed him about the South African letter, but Horbury claimed ignorance, his shifty manner betraying him. As dawn approached, Poirot retired to his room, his mind a whirl of clues. The family's motives were clear: wounded loyalty, George's greed, David's hatred, Harry's desperation, Pilar's ambition, Stephen's secrecy. But the locked room and the bloodstain pointed to a calculated act. Someone, Poirot knew, had planned this murder with care, and the truth lay in the details. As he gazed at the snow beyond his window, he murmured, "The little gray cells, they see what others miss. The game grows darker, but the light will come." Chapter 6. The Hidden Past. The gray light of Christmas morning filtered through the frost-etched windows of Greystone Hall, casting a pallor over the house that seemed to mirror the gloom within. The festive trappings, the holly wreaths, the glittering tree stood in stark contrast to the tragedy that had unfolded, as if mocking the shattered illusion of holiday cheer. Hercule Poirot, having slept little, rose with the dawn, his mind a crucible of details: the misplaced bloodstain, the locked study, the family's tangled motives. Simeon Lee's murder was no crime of impulse, he was certain. It was a carefully woven tapestry of deceit, and the threads led back to the patriarch's shadowed past. Poirot breakfasted alone in the morning room, his café au lait and toast consumed with mechanical precision as he reviewed the case. The bloodstain on the hearth, too far from Simeon's body, suggested a deliberate act to mislead. The locked door and secure window pointed to an inside job, yet the absence of a murder weapon puzzled him. And then there was Stephen Farr, the enigmatic cousin from South Africa, whose name kept surfacing, whispered in servants' gossip, hinted at in Simeon's taunts. Poirot's little gray cells hummed, sensing that the key to the crime lay not in the present tensions, but in the secrets of years past. The household was subdued, the family avoiding one another as they grappled with grief, fear, or perhaps guilt. Inspector Sugden, having spent the night coordinating with the coroner, who was still delayed by the snow, had set up a makeshift office in the library. Poirot joined him there, finding the inspector poring over notes, his face etched with fatigue. "No weapon yet," Sugden said, rubbing his eyes. "We've searched the study, the corridors, even the servants' quarters. It's as if the blade vanished." Poirot nodded, his eyes scanning the room's bookshelves. "The weapon, it will be found, Inspector. But first, we must uncover the why. Simeon Lee's past, it holds the answer. His life in South Africa, his family's wounds, the letters from Cape Town. We must dig deeper," Sugden agreed, and they decided to question the family again, this time focusing on Simeon's history. But first, Poirot requested a private word with Horbury, the butler, whose shifty demeanor had caught his attention. Horbury was summoned to the library, his thin frame rigid, his eyes darting like a cornered animal's. "I've told you all." "I know," he said, his voice tight. "I heard nothing, saw nothing." Poirot fixed him with a piercing gaze. "And yet, Monsieur Horbury, you mentioned a letter from South Africa, burned by Monsieur Lee. You saw the name Farr. What else? Did you see?" Horbury's face paled. I shouldn't have said that. It was nothing, just a glance." The master was angry, tore it up, threw it in the fire. "I only caught the name because it was bold, at the top." "And what did Monsieur Lee say of this letter?" Poirot pressed, his voice soft but relentless. Horbury swallowed. He muttered something about old sins and no son of mine. "I didn't understand, sir, I swear." His hands twisted, and Poirot dismissed him, noting the fear in his eyes. The butler knew more than he admitted, but furor him silent. Next, Poirot sought out Lydia Lee, finding her in the conservatory, arranging poinsettias with a precision that bordered on obsession. Her gray eyes met his, and she set down her shears, her expression guarded. "Monsieur Poirot, you have questions, I presume?" "Oui, madame," Poirot said, seating himself on a wicker chair. "Your father-in-law, he spoke of family secrets, of surprises in his will. Did he ever mention his past South Africa, perhaps, or an unacknowledged child?" Lydia's fingers paused, then resumed their work. "Simeon was not a man to share confidences," she said carefully. "But once, a year ago, he was in a rare mood, drunk, I think. He spoke of his early days, of a woman in Johannesburg, someone he wronged. He said she bore him a son, but he never claimed him. Blood doesn't make family, he said. I thought it was just talk, but now?" Her voice trailed off, and she met Poirot's gaze. "You think this connects to his death?" "Perhaps," Poirot replied, his tone neutral. "And Stephen? Far did Simeon speak of him?" Lydia frowned. "Only to say he was a guest, not family. But there was something in his tone, bitterness, maybe. I didn't press." She turned back to her flowers, signaling the end of the conversation, but Poirot noted her unease. A son, unacknowledged. The piece fit, but the puzzle was far from complete. Poirot moved to the drawing room, where he found David Lee alone, staring at the Christmas tree, its candles unlit, its ornaments glinting dully. David's face was haggard, his eyes red-rimmed, and Poirot sensed the weight of old grief. "Monsieur Lee," he began gently, "your father's death, it stirs memories of your mother, we." David's head snapped up, his voice sharp. "What do you know of my mother?" "He killed her, you know, not with a knife, but with cruelty. His affairs, his lies, she withered under them, and he laughed about it, even yesterday, saying her memory was a burden I'd never shake." His hands clenched, and Poirot saw the depth of his pain. "Did he speak of others from that time?" Poirot asked. "A woman, perhaps, or a child?" David's eyes narrowed. "He mentioned South Africa once, years ago. Said he left mistakes behind, but they didn't matter. I thought he meant business deals, but now I wonder." "He was a monster, Poirot." His voice broke, and he turned away, leaving Poirot to ponder the venom in his words. The detective's next stop was the servants' hall, where he found Tressilian, the maid who had whispered of the South African letter. She was polishing silver, her hands steady but her eyes wary. "I don't like to speak ill, sir," she said when pressed, "but the master was troubled lately. Those letters from Cape Town, they came every few months. He'd read them, then burn them. Once, I heard him shout, 'You'll not get a penny, not after what you did.' I don't know who he meant, but it was after Mr. Farr arrived." Poirot thanked her, his mind turning to Stephen. The letters, the name Farr, Simeon's cryptic words to Horbury, "No son of mine." The pieces were aligning, but the picture remained blurred. In the afternoon, Poirot returned to the study, now cordoned off by Sugden's orders. The coroner had finally arrived, confirming the cause of death: a single, deep cut to the throat, made by a sharp blade, likely a straight razor or dagger, which remained missing. Poirot examined the room again, his eyes drawn to the desk. Among the scattered papers, he found a torn photograph, half hidden beneath a ledger. It showed a young woman, her face scratched out, her dress suggesting an earlier era, perhaps the 1890s. On the back, in faded ink, was a name, Eliza. Poirot's pulse quickened. Eliza Farr, perhaps. Stephen's mother. He showed the photograph to Sugden, who frowned. "Could be important. I'll have it checked, but it's old, might not lead anywhere." Poirot disagreed silently. To him, it was a beacon, illuminating Simeon's past. As evening fell, Poirot sought out Stephen Farr, finding him in the billiard room, idly rolling balls across the table. His lean frame was tense, his gray eyes guarded as Poirot approached. "Monsieur Farr," Poirot began, holding up the photograph. "This woman Eliza. She was your mother, Nan." Stephen's hand froze, the cue trembling. "Where did you get that?" he demanded, his voice low. "In the study," Poirot said, watching him closely. "Simeon kept it, but her face is destroyed." "Why?" Stephen set the cue down, his jaw tight. "I don't know. My mother died when I was young. She never spoke of Simeon, but I heard rumors he knew her, back in Johannesburg. That's all I'll say." He turned away, but Poirot caught the pain in his eyes, the anger beneath his calm. Before Poirot could press further, a servant interrupted, summoning him to subdon. The inspector had found a copy of Simeon's will, locked in a safe in the study. It divided the estate equally among Alfred, George, David, and Harry, with a generous bequest for Pilar, but a codicil mentioned by the solicitor Charlton was missing, rumored to alter the shares significantly. "Someone took it," said grimly. "Could be our motive." Poirot nodded, his mind racing. The will, the photograph, the letters all pointed to a secret tied to Stephen and Simeon's South African days. Was Stephen the unacknowledged son Lydia had mentioned? Had Simeon's taunts about the will pushed him to murder? Or was another hand at work, hiding behind the family's obvious motives? As night deepened, Poirot stood by his window, the snow reflecting the moonlight. The house was silent, but the air thrummed with secrets. "The past," he murmured. "It is the key. Eliza Farr, the burned letters, the missing caduceus, the little gray cells. They will uncover the truth." The game was far from over, and Poirot sensed the next move was near. Chapter 7. The clue of the bloodstain. The morning of December 26th broke over Greystone Hall with a brittle clarity, the snow outside gleaming under a weak sun that did little to warm the chill within the house. The festive decorations, once vibrant, now seemed garish, a mockery of the tragedy that had cast its shadow over the Christmas season. Hercule Poirot, having spent a restless night piecing together the fragments of Simeon Lee's murder, emerged from his room with a renewed sense of purpose. The misplaced bloodstain on the hearth, the locked study, the torn photograph of Eliza Farr were not mere details, but signposts to the truth. His little gray cells, ever active, urged him to revisit the scene of the crime, certain that the room held secrets yet to be uncovered. Poirot breakfasted sparingly in the morning room, his café au lait sipped with precision as he reviewed the case. The family's motives, Zelfrid's wounded loyalty, George's greed, David's hatred, Harry's desperation, Pilar's ambition, Stephen's secrecy formed a web of suspicion. But the physical evidence pointed to a calculated act. The bloodstain, too far from Simeon's body, suggested a deliberate attempt to mislead, and the absence of the murder weapon hinted at a killer who planned meticulously. Stephen Farr's connection to Simeon's South African past, underscored by the photograph and burned letters, loomed large. But Poirot sensed the truth was more complex. A tapestry woven from both past and present. Inspector Sugden, red-eyed from lack of sleep, joined Poirot in the library, where a fire burned low, casting flickering shadows across the bookshelves. "The coroner's report confirms it," Sugden said, spreading papers on the desk. "Single cut to the throat, clean and deep, likely a razor or dagger. Still no sign of the weapon. We've searched every room, even the chimneys. It's as if it vanished into thin air." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Not vanished, Inspector. Hidden, perhaps, or removed by a clever hand. Let us return to the study. The room, it speaks, if we listen." They crossed the silent corridors. The house hushed as the family kept to their rooms, avoiding the weight of suspicion. The study, still cordoned off, was as they had left it, Simeon's body removed, but the bloodstain on the rug and the overturned table preserved under Sugden's orders. Poirot knelt by the hearth, his gloved hands tracing the edge of the bloodstain. It was a single, distinct mark, too precise for a natural spill, and its distance from the body nearly 3 feet. At him. He examined the rug. It's heavy, weaved slightly askew, and detected the faint residue he had noted before, wax, barely perceptible, as if a candle had been used to lubricate a movement. Regard as Inspector Poirot said, pointing to the rug's edge. The wax, it suggests the rug was moved, perhaps to place the bloodstain here, away from the body. Why? Sugden frowned, crouching beside him. To make it look like the murder happened elsewhere in the room. But why bother, with the door locked and the window latched? Poirot rose, his gaze sweeping the room. The overturned table caught his eye, its legs scratched, as if dragged deliberately. He approached it, noting its position too neatly toppled, as if staged to suggest a struggle. The killer, he murmured, wished to create confusion, to obscure the time or manner of the crime. But the bloodstain, it is the key. It tells us the killer was not hasty. Sugden scratched his chin. You think it's staged, then? But the locked door, how'd the killer get out? Poirot's mustache twitched. That, Inspector, is the question. The door, bolted from within, the key in Simeon's pocket, the window secure yet. Someone left this room. Let us examine the door. They inspected the heavy oak door, its bolt old, but intact, the key now in Sugden's evidence bag. Poirot ran his fingers along the frame, searching for irregularities, but found none. The window, too, was secure, its latch rusted from disuse. He turned to the walls, tapping the paneling, but the wood was solid, no hint of a hidden passage. Yet the absence of an exit gnawed at him, a puzzle within a puzzle. As they worked, Horbury appeared, summoned by Sugden to clarify his movements. The butler's face was pale, his eyes darting nervously. I was in the servants' hall when the scream came, he said, repeating his earlier statement. I ran up with the others. Before that I brought the master his evening brandy, around 9. He was alone, in a foul mood. Poirot fixed him with a piercing gaze. And what did he say? Monsieur Horbury? You mentioned an argument. No son of mine, you said. Who was with him? Horbury's hands twisted. I didn't see anyone, sir. I heard voices through the door, about an hour before, but I couldn't make out who. The master was shouting, angry. I thought it best not to linger. Poirot nodded, dismissing him, but noting his unease. The voices, he said to Sugden, they may be significant. Simeon argued with someone, perhaps Stephen, perhaps another. We must learn more. Sugden agreed, and they turned to the family, summoning them one by one to the library for further questioning. Alfred Lee entered first, his face haggard, his hands clasped tightly. I've told you everything, he said, his voice strained. I was with Lydia, in the drawing room. Father's death, it's torn me apart. Poirot leaned forward. And yet, Monsieur Lee, your father mocked your loyalty. Did he ever speak of his past? Of South Africa? Of a woman named Eliza Farr? Alfred's eyes widened. Eliza? No, never. He rarely spoke of South Africa, except to boast of his wealth. Why do you ask? Poirot waved a hand. A detail, perhaps. But tell me, did you see Stephen Farr near the study yesterday? Alfred hesitated. I saw him in the hall, near father's door, around 8. He looked tense, but I thought nothing of it. His voice faltered, and Sugden dismissed him, noting the new lead. George Lee was next, his bluster subdued by fatigue. South Africa, he scoffed when asked. Father never talked about it, except to say he outsmarted everyone there. As for Stephen, I barely know the man. He kept to himself, skulking about. Wouldn't surprise me if he's involved. His alibi billiard room alone remained shaky, and Poirot sensed his eagerness to deflect suspicion. David Lee, accompanied by Hilda, was more forthcoming. "Father's past was a shadow over us," he said, his voice bitter. "He ruined my mother with his affairs, and I heard whispers of others, a woman in Johannesburg, maybe more. He never named her, but he'd laugh about mistakes he left behind. If Stephen's tied to that, it explains father's interest in him." Hilda.com, as ever, confirmed their library alibi, but added, "David's right. Simeon was cruel about his past, as if it were a game." Harry Lee sauntered in, his charm frayed, but intact. South Africa, father's glory days, or so he claimed. Never mentioned any Eliza, but he hinted at old scores to settle. Stephen saw him near the study yesterday, looking like he'd swallowed a lemon. Shifty sort, if you ask me. His conservatory alibi with Pilar held. But Poirot noted his quickness to point at Stephen. Pilar Estravados entered with her usual grace, her dark eyes assessing. "My grandfather spoke of South Africa only once," she said, her accent soft. "He said he left enemies there, but they couldn't touch him now. Stephen, he was kind to me, but distant. I saw him in the garden yesterday, before dinner, pacing like a caged animal." Her conservatory alibi with Harry was solid, but Poirot sensed she was holding something back. Stephen Farr was last, his lean frame tense as he sat. "My mother was Eliza Farr," he admitted, his voice low. "She knew Simeon in Johannesburg, years ago. He abandoned her, left her to raise me alone. She died when I was 10. Simeon invited me here, said he wanted to make amends, but he mocked me, said I'd never be his son." His eyes burned with restrained anger. "I was in the garden when he died. That's all." Poirot studied him. "And the letters from Cape Town. They were about you, Nan." Stephen's jaw tightened. "I don't know. He never showed me any." His denial felt hollow, and Sugden noted it. As the interviews ended, Poirot returned to the study, his mind churning. The bloodstain, the wax, the staged table all pointed to a killer who planned carefully. Stephen's connection to Eliza Farr, confirmed by the photograph and his own words, made him a prime suspect, but Poirot hesitated. The motive was clear: resentment, perhaps revenge, but the execution felt too precise for a crime of passion. And Horbury's overheard words, "No son of mine," suggested Simeon had confronted someone. Perhaps Stephen, perhaps another. Standing by the hearth, Poirot closed his eyes, letting the room's silence speak. The bloodstain was the key. A deliberate misdirection. The killer had moved the rug, used wax to slide it, to place the stain where it would confuse the timeline. The locked door, the missing weapon, the torn photograph, all were pieces of a calculated act. "The little gray cells," he murmured. "They see the pattern, the truth. It is close." As he left the study, the house seemed to hold its breath. The snow outside, a silent witness to the secrets within. The game was far from over, and Poirot knew the next move would be decisive. Chapter 8. Family Secrets Unravel. The late afternoon of December 26th cast a muted glow over Greystone Hall, the snow outside softening the harsh edges of the world, but doing little to ease the tension within. The house, once alive with the promise of Christmas, now felt like a mausoleum, its corridors echoing with the unspoken fears of its inhabitants. Hercule Poirot, his mind a crucible of clues, had spent the day sifting through the family's motives and the physical evidence of Simeon Lee's murder. The bloodstain on the hearth, the wax residue on the rug, the torn photograph of Eliza Farrell pointed to a killer who had planned with meticulous care. Yet the locked study and the missing murder weapon remained a tantalizing enigma, and Poirot's little gray cells were restless, sensing the truth was within reach. After a sparse lunch, Poirot requested Inspector Sugden's permission to gather the family in the drawing room. "It is time," he told the inspector, his eyes gleaming, "to shake the tree and see what falls. The killer is among us, and the secrets of the past will reveal them." Sugden, though skeptical of Poirot's theatrical approach, agreed, and a servant was dispatched to summon the household. The drawing room, with its unlit Christmas tree and heavy velvet curtains, was a fitting stage for the confrontation, its air thick with the scent of pine and wax. The family assembled reluctantly, their faces a gallery of unease. Alfred Lee, pale and drawn, sat beside Lydia, whose sharp eyes betrayed her anxiety despite her composed posture. George Lee, his florid face set in a scowl, stood by the fireplace, Magdalen at his side, her fingers twisting a silk handkerchief. David Lee, his dark eyes burning with suppressed emotion, sat stiffly, Hilda's steady presence anchoring him. Harry Lee leaned against a bookcase, his usual charm replaced by a wary alertness. Pilar Estravados, vibrant, in a dark green dress, perched on a settee, her gaze darting between the others with a mix of curiosity and caution. Stephen Farr entered last, his lean frame tense, his gray eyes meeting Poirot's briefly before settling on the floor. Poirot stood before the fireplace, his small figure commanding the room with quiet authority. Inspector Sugden, notebook in hand, stood by the door, his expression one of cautious anticipation. The family's eyes were on Poirot, some hostile, some fearful, all expectant. Madame et Messieurs, Poirot began, his voice clear and measured, we stand in the shadow of a terrible crime. Simeon Lee was murdered in a locked room, his throat cut, his blood staining the rug. Yet the blood stain, it was not where it should be, and the room, it tells a story of deception. I have listened, and now I will share what the little gray cells have uncovered. He paused, letting the silence weigh on them. Simeon Lee was a man of secrets, a man who built his fortune in South Africa through means not always honest. He left behind wounds, betrayals, broken promises. One such wound was a woman, Eliza Farr, whose photograph I found in his desk, her face scratched out. She was, I believe, the mother of Stephen Farr. A murmur rippled through the room. Stephen's head snapped up, his jaw tight, but he said nothing. Alfred shifted uncomfortably, Lydia's hand tightening on his arm. George snorted, Magdalen's eyes narrowed, David's gaze darkened, and Harry's cigarette paused mid-air. Pilar's expression remained unreadable. Poirot continued, holding up the torn photograph. Eliza Farr bore Simeon a son, unacknowledged, raised in poverty, while Simeon amassed his wealth. Stephen, you came to Greystone Hall at Simeon's invitation, did you not? To confront the father who abandoned you. Stephen's voice was low, controlled. Yes, he wrote to me, said he wanted to make amends. But when I arrived, he mocked me, called me a bastard, said I'd never be his heir. I hated him, but I didn't kill him. Poirot nodded, his eyes never leaving Stephen's. Perhaps. But let us consider the crime. The blood stain on the hearthrug was too far from the body, placed there deliberately. I found wax on the rug, suggesting it was moved to confuse the time of death. The table, overturned, was staged to suggest a struggle. The door, locked from within, the key in Simeon's pocket, yet the killer escaped. How? He turned to the family, his gaze sweeping over them. Each of you had reason to wish Simeon dead. Alfred, your loyalty was mocked, your inheritance threatened. George, your greed was scorned, your share of the estate at risk. David, your hatred for your father's cruelty to your mother burned deep. Harry, your return was met with disdain, your hopes for money dashed. Pilar, you stood to gain, perhaps more than you admit. And Stephen, your resentment was a fire kindled long ago. The room bristled with tension. Alfred's face reddened. George blustered. David's hands clenched. Harry's smile tightened. Pilar's eyes gleamed. And Stephen stood rigid, his fists balled. Poirot raised a hand. But the evidence points to one among you. Stephen Farr, you were seen near the study, before the scream. Your alibi in the garden weakened by the absence of footprints in the fresh snow. Horbury heard Simeon shout, "You're no son of mine," words that echo your confrontation. The photograph, the letters from Cape Town, they tie you to Simeon's past. And the bloodstain, moved with wax, suggests a mind that planned carefully. Stephen stepped forward, his voice steady but strained. I won't deny I hated him. He ruined my mother, left her to die alone. When I confronted him that night, he laughed, said I'd never get a penny. I lost my temper, yes, but I didn't kill him. I left him alive, I swear. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Then explain the wax, monsieur. The rug was moved, the bloodstain placed to mislead. Who but you, with your motive so clear, would plan such a deception? Stephen's face hardened. I don't know about the wax, but I'll tell you this: I went to his study at 8. We argued, he insulted me, and I left. An hour later, I was in the garden when I heard the scream. Someone else was there after me. The family exchanged glances, doubt and suspicion flickering. Sugden, scribbling notes, looked to Poirot, who paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. Very well, Monsieur Farr, let us test your truth. The locked room myth is the heart of the mystery. But there is one possibility we have not explored. He crossed to the study, the family trailing behind, their footsteps heavy on the marble floor. In the room, Poirot approached the oak paneling behind the desk, his fingers tracing the seams. A house, like Greystone Hall, he said, it has secrets of its own. Old houses often hide passages, Nan. He pressed the panel, and to the astonishment of all, it clicked, revealing a narrow opening, just wide enough for a man to slip through. A cold draft wafted out, carrying the scent of dust and stone. Sugden gasped. A secret passage. Where does it lead? Poirot stepped inside, his flashlight illuminating a cramped corridor that descended to the servants' quarters. It leads to freedom, he said. The killer entered, killed Simeon, staged the scene, and slipped out, locking the door with the key left in Simeon's pocket. The bolt was drawn from within, but the passage was the escape. Stephen's face was ashen. I didn't know about that passage. I swear it. Poirot turned to him, his voice soft but relentless. But you knew of Simeon's cruelty, his betrayal of your mother. You confronted him, and in your rage, you struck. The wax, the rug, the passage, you planned it all. Stephen's calm broke, his voice rising. I did it, he said, his words tumbling out. I killed him. He mocked my mother, my life, everything. I used a razor from his desk, slashed his throat, moved the rug to confuse the time, and slipped out through the passage. I found it weeks ago, exploring the house. I wanted justice for her. The family gasped, Alfred clutching Lydia, George sputtering, David staring in shock, Harry swearing softly, Pilar's eyes wide but dry. Sugden stepped forward, handcuffs ready. Stephen Farr, you're under arrest. Poirot raised a hand, his expression troubled. One moment, Inspector. The confession, it is too neat. The little gray cells, they whisper of doubt. Stephen, you protect someone, perhaps, or is your guilt complete? Stephen's eyes met Poirot's, and for a moment, a flicker of something, fear, loyalty, passed across his face. It's me, he insisted, no one else. As Sugden led him away, Poirot stood silent, his mind racing. The passage explained the locked room, the wax, the bloodstain, but Stephen's confession felt like a curtain, drawn too quickly. The photograph, the missing codicil, the family's secrets, there was more to uncover. The drawing room, now empty, seemed to pulse with unspoken truths, and Poirot knew the game was not yet won. Chapter 9. The Confession. The evening of December 26 settled over Greystone Hall like a heavy shroud. The snow outside muffling all sound, as if the world itself held its breath in the wake of Stephen Farr's confession. The drawing room, where the family had gathered just hours before, now stood empty, its Christmas tree unlit, its candles extinguished, the festive cheer replaced by a palpable sense of dread. Hercule Poirot, standing alone by the fireplace, felt the weight of the case pressing upon him. Stephen's admission to Simeon Lee's murder, his motive rooted in the old man's betrayal of his mother. Eliza Farfet, the evidence, the wax on the rug, the staged bloodstain, the secret passage. Yet Poirot's little gray cells were restless, whispering of inconsistencies, of a truth half revealed. The confession, so swift and complete, felt like a door slammed shut before all secrets could be aired. Inspector in the library was preparing to escort Stephen to the local police station, the roads now partially cleared by a plow. Stephen sat in a chair, his lean frame rigid, his gray eyes fixed on the floor, handcuffs glinting on his wrists. The family, dismissed to their rooms, had dispersed in stunned silence, their reactions a mix of shock, relief, and lingering suspicion. Poirot, however, lingered in the drawing room, his mind turning over the details. The missing codicil, too, Simeon's will, the photograph of Eliza Farr. The overheard argument, "No son of mine," all pointed to Stephen, but a nagging doubt persisted. Was Stephen shielding someone, or was his guilt as clear as it seemed? Poirot crossed to the library, where Sugden was reviewing his notes. "Monsieur Poirot," the inspector said, looking up, "we've got our man." Confession, motive, means the passage explains the locked room. Case closed, I'd say. Poirot's mustache twitched, his eyes narrowing. "Perhaps, Inspector, but the little gray cells, they are not satisfied. The confession, it is too neat, like a play rehearsed. Let us speak to Monsieur Farr once more." "Alone," Sugden shrugged, gesturing to Stephen. "Be my guest," but he said his piece. Poirot sat opposite Stephen, his gaze steady, but not unkind. "Monsieur Farr," he began, his voice soft, "you have confessed to a terrible crime, and the evidence supports you, the wax, the passage, the motive of your mother's suffering. Yet I sense a shadow in your words. Why confess so quickly? Is there another you protect?" Stephen's head lifted, his eyes meeting Poirot's with a flicker of defiance. "I told you, it was me. I hated him for what he did to my mother. He invited me here to taunt me, to dangle his wealth, and then snatch it away. I went to his study, argued with him, and when he laughed at me, called me, and nobody's son, I took the razor from his desk and cut his throat. I moved the rug with wax to make it look like the murder happened later, slipped out through the passage. That's all." Poirot leaned forward, his voice gentle but probing. "And the codicil, monsieur, the will that promised you nothing, yet perhaps gave another more. Did you see it?" Stephen's jaw tightened. "I didn't care about the will. He said I'd get nothing, and I believed him. I didn't look for any Poirot studied him, noting the tension in his hands, the slight tremor in his voice. "You are a man of pride, Monsieur Farr, but also of loyalty. To whom do you owe this loyalty? To another in this house, perhaps?" Stephen's eyes flashed, but he shook his head. "No one. It's my crime, Poirot." "Let it end here," Sugden, impatient, interrupted. "We're wasting time, Monsieur Poirot. He's confessed, and the evidence fits. I'll take him in." Poirot raised a hand, his expression troubled. "One moment, Inspector. Allow me to return to the study. There is a detail I must confirm." Leaving Stephen with Sugden, Poirot retraced his steps to the study, now a silent testament to the crime. The room was as they had left it, the blood stain. On the rug, a dark accusation. The overturned table, a staged prop. Poirot knelt by the hearth, his fingers tracing the wax residue he had noted before. It was subtle, but unmistakably a thin film, as if a candle had been used to slide the rug. He stood, his gaze sweeping the room, lingering on the secret passage's entrance. Its panel now slightly ajar, he approached the desk, where the torn photograph of Eliza Farr had been found. Rummaging through the drawers, he discovered a small, locked box, overlooked in the initial search. With Sugden's permission, He had a servant fetch a key from Simeon's belongings, and the box clicked open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, yellowed with age, bearing a handwritten note in Simeon's scrawl. To my granddaughter Pilar, who has the fire I lost. The estate is hers, if she proves worthy. It was not the codicil, but a private memorandum, hinting at Simeon's intentions. Poirot's mind raced. Pilar Estravados, the vibrant outsider, stood to gain the most, yet she had seemed detached, uninvolved. Had Stephen known of this note? Was his confession a shield for her? He returned to the library, the note in hand, and confronted Stephen. "Monsieur Farr," he said, holding up the paper, "this suggests Simeon favored Pilar. Did you know?" Stephen's eyes widened, then narrowed. "No, he never told me. But it doesn't change anything. I killed him." Poirot turned to Sugden. "Inspector, I must speak with Mademoiselle Estravados. There is a connection here we cannot ignore." Pilar was summoned, her dark eyes wary as she entered the library. She wore a simple black dress, her crimson vibrancy subdued in deference to the tragedy. Poirot showed her the note, watching her reaction closely. "Mademoiselle," he said, "your grandfather intended to favor you. Did you know this?" Pilar's expression flickered surprise, then calculation. He hinted at it. She admitted, her accent soft. "He said I was like him, that I had his spirit, but he never showed me this. Why does it matter?" Poirot's voice was gentle but firm. "It matters, mademoiselle, because Stephen Farr has confessed to the murder. Yet I believe he protects someone. You, perhaps." Pilar's eyes widened, and she glanced at Stephen, who remained silent, his face a mask. "Stephen. No, he wouldn't. I had no part in this, Monsieur Poirot. I loved my grandfather, in my way. He was cruel, yes, but he saw something in me the others didn't." Stephen spoke suddenly, his voice hoarse. "Leave her out of this, Poirot. It's my doing, not hers." Poirot paced, his hands clasped behind his back. "The little gray cells, they see a pattern. Stephen, your confession explains much: the wax, the passage, the motive. But the note, the codicil's absence, the photograph, they suggest another layer. If you protect Pilar, or another, speak now." Stephen shook his head, his voice firm. "It's me, no one else." Sugden, exasperated, stood. "Enough, Monsieur Poirot. We have the killer, the evidence, the confession. I'm taking him to the station." As Stephen was led away, the family gathered in the hall, watching in silence. Alfred's face was ashen, Lydia's hand on his arm. George muttered about justice, Magdalen's eyes glinting with relief. David stared at Stephen, his expression unreadable, Hilda steady beside him. Harry lit a cigarette, his hands shaking slightly. Pilar's gaze followed Stephen, her lips parted as if to speak, but she remained silent. Poirot returned to the drawing room, alone, his mind churning. The confession fit, yet it felt incomplete, like a puzzle with a missing piece. The note to Pilar, the codicil's absence, Stephen's quick admission all suggested a deeper truth. Had Stephen acted alone, driven by vengeance, or was he shielding another, perhaps Pilar, whose inheritance might have sparked his loyalty? The secret passage, the wax, the bloodstain, they were the work of a careful mind, but whose, as night fell, Poirot stood by the window, the snow reflecting the moonlight. "The little gray cells," he murmured, "they see the shadow of truth. Stephen Farr, you are part of it, but not all." The game continues. The house, silent around him, held its secrets close, but Poirot was determined to unravel them. Chapter 10. The final twist. The night of December 26th cloaked Greystone Hall, in a silence broken only by the occasional creak of the old house settling under the weight of snow. The festive glow of Christmas had been extinguished, replaced by a chill that seeped into the bones of the ancient estate. Hercule Poirot, standing alone in the drawing room, gazed at the unlit Christmas tree. its ornaments glinting faintly in the moonlight that filtered through the frost-etched windows. Stephen Farr's confession to Simeon Lee's murder, the wax on the rug, the secret passage, the motive rooted in his mother's betrayal had seemed to close the case. Yet Poirot's little gray cells buzzed with unease. The confession was to tidy the pieces, fitting almost too well, and the missing codicil, the note favoring Pilar Estravados, and the torn photograph of Elisa Farr whispered of a deeper truth. Poirot's mind returned to the study, the scene of the crime, where every detail, the misplaced bloodstain, the staged table, the hidden passage pointed to a calculated act. Stephen's admission explained much, but the note found in the locked box, declaring Simeon's intent to favor Pilar, suggested another layer. Had Stephen known of this? Was he protecting her, or was there another player in this deadly game? The detective's instincts, honed by years of unraveling human deceit, told him the puzzle was not yet complete. He left the drawing room and retraced his steps to the study, now dimly lit by a single lamp left by Inspector Sugden's men. The room was, as he had last seen it, the rug askew, the bloodstain on the hearth, the overturned table. Poirot knelt by the secret passage's entrance, its panel still ajar, and examined it closely. His flashlight revealed a faint scratch on the frame, and there, caught in a splinter, was a scrap of paper, no larger than a postage stamp. He extracted it with care, his pulse quickening as he read a single word in Simeon's scrawl, Pilar. The discovery was a spark in the darkness. Poirot pocketed the scrap, his mind racing. The note in the box had praised Pilar's fire, hinting at her as the favored heir. This fragment, hidden in the passage, suggested she was central to Simeon's plans and perhaps to his death. Was Stephen's confession a shield for her, or was there another explanation? Poirot resolved to confront Pilar, sensing her enigmatic presence held the key to the final twist. He found her in the conservatory, a haven of glass and greenery, where the air was warm with the scent of hothouse flowers. Pilar sat on a wicker bench, her black dress stark against the vibrant poinsettias, her dark eyes reflecting the moonlight. She looked up as Poirot entered, her expression a mix of curiosity and wariness. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her Spanish accent soft but clear, "you seek me out again. Have you more questions?" Poirot seated himself opposite her, his hands folded, his gaze steady. "Mademoiselle Estravados, I have found something that concerns you." He produced the scrap of paper, holding it up. "This was in the secret passage, bearing your name, and in your grandfather's desk, a note declaring his intent to favor you, perhaps with the bulk of his estate. Did you know of this?" Pilar's eyes widened, but her composure held. "He spoke of it, yes," she admitted, her voice low. "The night before he died, he called me to his study. He said I was like Himbold, unafraid. He said he wanted to leave me the estate, or most of it, because the others were weak, unworthy. I thought he was testing me, as he tested everyone." Poirot leaned forward, his voice gentle but probing. "And did you tell anyone of this, mademoiselle? Stephen Farr, perhaps?" Pilar's gaze flickered, and she hesitated, a rare crack in her poise. I mentioned it to Stephen, yes. We spoke in the garden that day. He was kind to me, listened when the others ignored me. I told him grandfather's words, but I didn't think he'd care. He seemed angry, but not at me." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Angry, mademoiselle? And yet he confessed to the murder, claiming vengeance for his mother. I believe he protects you, Nan. He knew you stood to gain, and perhaps he feared the others would cheat you of your inheritance." Pilar's hands clenched in her lap, her eyes flashing. "Stephen, protect me." "No, Monsieur Poirot, you're wrong. I had no part in this. I didn't ask for grandfather's money, and I didn't want him dead. Stephen, he acted alone, if he acted at all." Poirot studied her, noting the slight tremor in her voice, the way her eyes darted to the door. Mademoiselle, you are clever, like your grandfather, but the truth, it cannot hide forever. Stephen's confession, it is a sacrifice, perhaps for love, perhaps for loyalty. Tell me what you know. Pilar rose, her movements fluid but tense. I know nothing more, she said, her voice firm. Stephen confessed. Let him face the consequences. I want no part of this house, or its secrets. She turned to leave, but Poirot's voice stopped her. One moment, mademoiselle. The codicillet is still missing. If it names you, as the note suggests, it changes everything. Would you protect Stephen, as he protects you? Pilar's back stiffened, but she did not turn. I protect no one, she said, and slipped out, leaving Poirot alone with the rustle of leaves and the weight of her words. He returned to the library, where Sugden was finalizing paperwork for Stephen's transfer. The inspector looked up, his face weary. Monsieur Poirot, you're chasing ghosts. Fars confessed. The evidence fits. What more do you want? Poirot paced, his hands clasped behind his back. The truth, Inspector? Stephen's motive is clear. His mother's suffering, Simeon's cruelty, the passage, the wax, the bloodstainal align with his confession. But the note, the scrap, with Pilar's name, they suggest another hand, or a shared purpose. I must speak to Stephen once more. Sugden sighed but nodded, and Stephen was brought in, his handcuffs clinking softly. His face was drawn, his gray eyes resolute but haunted. Monsieur Poirot, he said, I've told you everything. Why drag this out? Poirot held up the scrap of paper. This, Monsieur Far, was found in the passage. It bears Pilar's name, and a note in Simeon's desk declares his intent to favor her. Did you know this when you killed him? Did you act to protect her inheritance? Stephen's eyes widened, then narrowed. Pilar, I didn't know about any note. She told me Simeon favored her, yes, but I didn't care about the money. I killed him for my mother, not for Pilar. Poirot's voice was soft, relentless. And yet, monsieur, your confession shields her. You knew she stood to gain, and you feared the family would contest it. You took the codicil, perhaps, to ensure her claim. Stephen shook his head, his voice hoarse. No codicil. I didn't touch his papers. I killed him, staged the scene, and left. That's all. Poirot stepped closer, his eyes piercing. The little gray cells. They see a man who loves, who sacrifices. You and Pilar, you spoke in the garden, shared confidences. Did she ask you to act, or did you choose to clear her path? Stephen's face crumpled, and for a moment, he seemed on the verge of speaking. Then he straightened, his voice firm. I acted alone. Leave Pilar out of this. Sugden, exasperated, stood. That's enough, Poirot. He's sticking to his story. I'm taking him now. As Stephen was led away, Poirot returned to the conservatory, his mind a whirl of possibilities. The scrap of paper, the note, hesitation. They pointed to her as the pivot of the crime, yet she denied involvement. Stephen's confession, so resolute, felt like a shield, but for whom? The family's motives, Alfred's loyalty, George's greed, David's hatred. Harry's desperation remained, but Pilar's potential inheritance cast a new light. Had Stephen killed to secure her future, or was there another hand guiding? The blade. Poirot stood among the poinsettias, the moonlight casting long shadows. The truth, he murmured. It is close, yet hidden. Pilar, Stephen, the codicil, the final piece awaits. The house, silent around him, held its breath, and Poirot knew the game was nearing its end. Chapter 11. The Departure. The morning of December 27th dawned over Greystone Hall with a pale, reluctant sun, its light filtering through the snow-heavy clouds to cast a ghostly glow on the estate. The house, once vibrant with the trappings of Christmas, now stood in mournful silence, its festive decorations, holly wreaths, tinsel, and candles seeming like relics of a forgotten celebration. Hercule Poirot, having spent the night wrestling with the puzzle of Simeon Lee's murder, rose with a clarity born of his little gray cell's relentless work. Stephen Farr's confession, the secret passage, the wax on the rug, and the note favoring Pilar Estravados had brought the case to a seeming close. Yet the detective's instincts whispered of a final truth still veiled. The scrap of paper bearing Pilar's name, found in the passage, and her guarded demeanor in the conservatory nagged at him, suggesting a deeper connection to Stephen's act. Poirot breakfasted alone in the morning room, his café au lait sipped with precision as he reviewed the case's threads. Stephen's motive vengeance for his mother, Eliza Farfit the evidence, and his knowledge of the passage explained the locked room. The wax and misplaced bloodstain pointed to a calculated plan, yet the missing codicil and the note praising Pilar hinted at another layer. Had Stephen acted to secure her inheritance, or was Pilar herself more involved than she admitted? The detective's mind, ever methodical, sought the final piece to complete the tapestry. The family, subdued by the weight of the tragedy and Stephen's arrest, gathered in the drawing room at Poirot's request. Inspector Sugden, preparing to depart with Stephen for the police station, had agreed to one final meeting, his patience worn thin by Poirot's persistent doubts. The room was dim, the Christmas tree unlit, its baubles catching the weak light like frozen tears. Alfred Lee sat with Lydia, his face etched with grief, her hand a steady anchor on his arm. George Lee, his bluster muted, stood by the window, Magdalene beside him, her eyes darting nervously. David Lee, pale and tense, sat with Hilda, whose calm presence seemed to hold him together. Harry Lee lounged against a bookcase, his usual charm replaced by a somber alertness. Pilar Estravados, in a simple gray dress, sat apart, her dark eyes watchful but unreadable. Poirot stood before the fireplace, his small figure commanding the room with quiet authority. Sugden, by the door, watched with a mix of skepticism and curiosity, his notebook tucked away. Madame et Messieurs Poirot began, his voice clear and measured. The crime that has darkened this house is, it seems, resolved. Stephen Farr has confessed to the murder of Simeon Lee, driven by the pain of his mother's betrayal. The secret passage, the wax on the rug, the bloodstain on the hearth all support his account. Yet the little gray cells, they are not at rest. There is a shadow, a question, that remains. The family stirred, their faces a mix of unease and exhaustion. Alfred's voice was hoarse. "What more is there, Monsieur Poirot?" Stephen admitted it. "Isn't that enough?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "It is almost enough, Monsieur Lee, but the truth, it is like a diamond many facets, not all seen at once. I found a note in Simeon's desk, declaring his intent to favor Mademoiselle Estravados, and a scrap in the passage bearing her name. These suggest a motive beyond Stephen's. Vengeance? I believe he acted, in part, to protect her claim." Pilar's head snapped up, her eyes flashing. "I told you, Monsieur Poirot, I had no part in this. Stephen acted for his own reasons, not mine." Poirot nodded, his gaze steady. "Perhaps, mademoiselle, but let us consider the heart of this crime. Simeon Lee, he was a man who played with fire, taunting his family, dangling his wealth. He invited Stephen, knowing his past, and favored you, Mademoiselle Pilar, for your spirit. Stephen, learning of this, feared the family would rob you of your inheritance. His confession, it is a shield for you, Nan. Stephen, brought in by Sugden, stood handcuffed, his face resolute. I told you, Poirot, it was me alone. Leave Pilar out of it." Poirot paced, his hands clasped behind his back. "I believe you, Monsieur Farr, in part. You killed Simeon, yes, but not only for your mother. You loved Pilar, or felt a duty to her. You knew the codicil, if it existed, would be contested by the family. Alfred's loyalty, George's greed, David's hatred, Harry's desperation. You acted to ensure her future, using the passage you discovered, The wax you applied, the scene you staged. Stephen's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, his silence a confirmation. Pilar's eyes widened, a flicker of guilt crossing her face. I didn't ask him to, she whispered. I only told him what grandfather said. I didn't know he'd... Poirot raised a hand. You are not guilty, mademoiselle, but you are the key. Stephen's act was for you, as much as for his mother. The codicil, if it exists, is hidden, but its shadow drove him to murder. Sugden stepped forward, his voice gruff. This changes nothing, Poirot, Farr confessed, and he's going to trial. We've got our man. Poirot nodded, his expression somber. We, Inspector. Justice will be served. But the heart of this crime, it is a tragedy of love and loss, of secrets and sacrifice. As Stephen was led away, the family began to disperse. Alfred, his voice trembling, vowed to honor Simeon's will fairly, ensuring each brother received their share. No more fighting, he said, glancing at Lydia, who nodded, her eyes soft with relief. George, chastened, muttered about cutting expenses, his bluster gone. Magdalen, silent, followed him out, her face pale. David, his anger spent, spoke quietly to Hilda, a hint of reconciliation in his tone. Perhaps we can move forward, he said, and she squeezed his hand. Harry, lighting a cigarette, offered a wry smile. Well, that's that. Back to the world, I suppose. He clapped Alfred on the shoulder, a rare gesture of warmth. Pilar lingered, her gaze fixed on the floor. Monsieur Poirot, she said, softly, I didn't want this. Stephen, he was kind, but I didn't see his pain. I'll return to Spain, away from this house. Her voice held a note of resolve, and Poirot believed her, as the family left. Sugden approached Poirot, his expression grudgingly respectful. You've a way with these things, Monsieur Poirot. I'll drive you to the station, if you're ready. The roads are clear enough now. Poirot inclined his head. Merci, Inspector. I am ready to depart. He returned to his room, packing his valise with meticulous care. The case, he reflected, was a study in human frailty, Simeon's cruelty, Stephen's vengeance, Pilar's unintended role. The secret passage, the wax, the bloodstain, they were tools of a desperate act, driven by love as much as hate. As he closed his valise, he murmured, the little gray cells, they have done their work, but the heart, it weeps for the cost. In the hall, he bid farewell to Lydia, whose quiet strength had held the family together. You have my thanks, Madame Lee, he said. You are the anchor of this house. She smiled faintly. And you, Monsieur Poirot, are its compass. Safe travels. As Sugden's car pulled away, Gorston Hall receded into the snow, its turrets fading like a dream. Poirot gazed out at the white expanse, his mind already turning to the next puzzle, the next truth to be uncovered. Chapter 12. The little grey cells. The train to London rattled through the snow-draped Devon countryside, its rhythm a steady counterpoint to the whirl of thoughts in Hercule Poirot's mind. The detective sat in a first-class carriage, his small, neat figure wrapped in a heavy overcoat, his mustache impeccably waxed, despite the early hour of his departure from Gorston Hall. A cup of hot chocolate steamed on the table before him, its aroma a faint comfort against the chill of the winter morning. Outside, the landscape was a study in white, the fields and hedgerows softened by snow, but Poirot's gaze was inward, reflecting on the dark drama that had unfolded at the Lee estate. The case of Simeon Lee's murder had been resolved, or so it seemed. Stephen Farr's confession, the razor, the wax-licked rug, the secret passage had provided a tidy solution. His motive rooted in the old man's betrayal of his mother, Eliza Farr, and perhaps a protective instinct toward Pilar, as whom Simeon had favored. The evidence fit, the misplaced bloodstain, the staged table, the hidden exit. Yet Poirot, sipping his chocolate, felt a lingering unease. A whisper from his little gray cells that the truth, while revealed, carried an echo of sacrifice. Stephen's swift admission, Pilar's guarded silences. The note in Simeon's desk, they wove a tapestry of human passion, where love and vengeance intertwined. As the train wound through a frozen valley, Poirot reviewed the case's threads. Simeon Lee, a man of ruthless cunning, had orchestrated a final act, summoning his fractured family to Greystone Hall to stir their resentments. His taunts mocking Alfred's loyalty, George's greed, David's pain, Harry's recklessness, and Stephen's illegitimacy had been a deliberate provocation, a test of their mettle. The note favoring Pilar, the missing codicil, the torn photograph of Eliza Farr, they were pieces of a puzzle designed to unsettle. Simeon Poirot mused, had known the risks, perhaps even courted them. As if daring fate to strike, the bloodstain on the hearth had been the key, its odd placement a clue to the killer's calculation. The wax residue, subtle but undeniable, revealed the rug's movement, a trick to confuse the timeline. The secret passage, a relic of the house's ancient design, had allowed Stephen to slip away, locking the door behind him with the key left in Simeon's pocket. It was a clever plan, born of a mind both desperate and precise. Yet Stephen's confession, so resolute, had a note of martyrdom, as if he bore the guilt to shield another Pilar, perhaps, whose inheritance he sought to protect. Poirot's thoughts turned to the family, now left to mend their wounds. Alfred, broken but resolute, had vowed to honor his father's will fairly, his loyalty finally freed from Simeon's shadow. Lydia, the quiet strength behind him, would guide the future. George, chastened by the ordeal, had spoken of frugality, his bluster dimmed. Magdalene, her beauty marred by fear, would follow, perhaps seeking a quieter life. David, his hatred spent, had found a fragile peace with Hilda's steady presence, their reconciliation a small light in the darkness. Harry, ever the rogue, would drift back to his wanderings, but with a newfound respect for his brothers. Pilar, enigmatic and untouched by the family's greed, would return to Spain, her inheritance secure, but her heart heavy with Stephen's sacrifice. The train's whistle pierced the silence, and Poirot glanced out at a passing village, its chimneys trailing smoke into the gray sky. He thought of Pilar's final words in the conservatory, her denial of complicity, yet her guilt over Stephen's act. She had not wielded the razor, but her revelation of Simeon's favor had sparked Stephen's rage, his love for her mingling with his hatred for his father. It was a tragedy, Poirot reflected, of human hearts caught in a web of old sins and new desires. Inspector Sugden, earnest and pragmatic, had accepted Stephen's confession as the end, his focus on procedure blinding him to the nuances Poirot saw. The detective smiled faintly, recalling Sugden's gruff respect as they parted at the station. "You've a knack for this, Monsieur Poirot," he had said, tipping his hat. "I'd not have seen half of it." Poirot had bowed, his modesty a mask for the satisfaction of a puzzle solved. As the train neared London, Poirot's mind lingered on the little gray cells, the quiet machinery of his intellect that had unraveled the case. The bloodstain had been the first clue, its placement a deliberate lie. The wax had confirmed the killer's intent, the passage his method, the photograph, the note, the overheard argument. No son of mine had pointed to Stephen's pain, but also to Pilar's unwitting role. It was a case, Poirot thought, where the heart and the mind had clashed, where love had led to murder, and sacrifice had sealed the truth. He sipped the last of his chocolate, its warmth a small comfort. The train slowed, the spires of London emerging through the mist. Poirot adjusted his hat, his reflection in the window a study in precision. "The little gray cells," he murmured, "they triumph, toujours, but the heart, it mourns the cost." The case was closed, Greystone Hall, a memory, but the echoes of its secrets would linger, a reminder of the fragile line between justice and tragedy.